Thank you, Jen. Thank you very much for having me back for the second year in a row. Appreciate it. UNH's Hemp Week, which is really great. It's good to see you all out here that care about hemp, cannabis, and trying to end prohibition so our farmers can grow this really profitable crop and environmentally friendly crop. And I'm doing this sort of in conjunction with Hemp History Week. I'm putting on an event next April 28th. We're going to have a bunch of different things. I'm going to be giving a talk on Boston's hemp history, which I'll be doing just in a few minutes now, and then I'll also be doing some of my cannabis curriculum. But we're going to have the founder of the Hempist. He's going to be there talking about what it's like to start a hemp store, to run it. He has his own line of hemp clothing, so he's going to talk about what it's like to do that. And there's also a woman that wrote a musical, a hemp musical. So we're going to have a guy that's going to perform a few songs from the Catlin County Hemp Wars. It's really great. And I'm going to show a few minutes from the Hemp for Victory movie, which is a lot of good historical perspective. And we're going to have a lot of free hemp food and hemp products. So I hope you guys can make it out there. And I'm also trying to inspire you to have your own Hemp History Week event in May. The Hemp History Week is May 2nd through the 8th, but the dates are flexible, so you can have it before that or after if finals get in the way. But I wanted to talk about Boston's hemp history. And cannabis hemp played a vital role in the development of human civilization as well as the founding of this country. And for over 300 years, up until about the 1850s, sailing ships dominated international trade and naval warfare. And this was also the most expansive time of migration in human history. So people were moving all over the place, and sailing ships were a very big part of that. Some of the larger ships of the day required thousands of pounds of hemp for cordage, sails, and even the caulking in between the planks of on the deck was made with hemp. And there could be 20 miles of hemp rope on a single ship. So it was really amazing. There's just so much hemp. The USS Constitution is Old Ironsides. This is the oldest commissioned warship in the U.S. Navy. And this is stationed in Charlestown near Boston. So you can climb aboard Old Ironsides, take a look at it, go back in history, and just check out all the ropes. These ropes are made out of plastic, though, unfortunately. They're not made out of hemp anymore, but hopefully one day they will be. And this is a drawing of Old Ironsides defeating the British frigate Java off the coast of Brazil in 1812. And the USS Constitution never lost a battle, so it was really a tremendous warship, and it's still in use today. It's still a commissioned warship. Now, all this rope for all these sailing ships had to be made somewhere, and it was made in these long wooden buildings called rope walks. And this is a depiction of several rope walks that were on Nantucket Island in the 1700s. So this is a really long time ago. And the rope walks were really long because the length was equal to the length of the longest piece of rope that you could make. So if you wanted to make a really big coil of rope, you needed a really long rope walk. So we had these, and rope making was one of the first industries in colonial America. It took over 100 men to create a 20-inch circumference cable-laid rope. And Boston's first rope walk was built in 1640, over 370 years ago. And it was located at the foot of Summer Street near present-day South Station. Rope making is a very involved process. First you have to cultivate the hemp, harvest it, and dry it. Then you have to separate, so you have all the stalks, then you have to separate the herds from the stalk, and you end up with this really rough fiber, which they then draw over these hackles to turn into this nice fine fiber, which can then be spun into rope, into yarn, and then the yarn is spun into rope of varying diameters. So it's a very involved process, and after they had the rope, to increase its buoyancy, they would heat tar and put tar on the rope too, so it was a very involved process. They had rope walks all over the Boston area. This is from 1722, and here you can see the Boston Common, and Beacon Hill is right up here. And we had rope walks all over the place. So this shows that, you know, they were all over there. And the British government tried to get the colonists to grow hemp. Hemp was a very valuable resource back then, and they wanted the colonists to grow hemp so they could export it back to England for the Royal Navy. bounties were given for growing hemp, and I'm sure you might have even heard that you could pay your taxes with hemp. And this is why, because it was such a valuable resource, and the British wanted us to grow it so they could use it. Hemp was grown up near Raleigh, Mass., near Salem, Mass., and also in western Massachusetts in the Connecticut River Valley. Unfortunately, despite all of these government incentives, hemp cultivation never became widespread in New England or in America, as a matter of fact. Instead, millions of pounds of hemp fiber was imported from Russia, where they grew lots of hemp in Russia, and they really knew how to process the fiber. So they would import it, and then our rope makers would turn it into rope. So these pictures show the general area in Boston where there were rope walks in the 1700s. So we have, Beacon Hill, the Common, where the Freedom Rally is held every year. So the next time you come to Boston, you can take your own rope walk, venture back into history by finding and try to find the location of all the rope walks that produced cordage back then. You can go to hempology.org and download a map and a guide, and then that's a good way to, find your way around the city and get a little historical perspective at the same time. This is a map of 1728. Here's the old State House. Faneuil Hall is down over here. And here's a group of rope walks in 1728. And this is where Boston's financial district is today. In 1788, a publication called the Federal Procession of Boston listed rope maker as one of the largest groups of mechanics. And this shows that hemp provided many jobs in early America. And by 1800, there were over 150 rope walks throughout America, up from Portland, Maine, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, had a lot of rope walks, all the way down to Kentucky. So there were 150 rope walks in 1800. In 1770, 6 years before the Revolution, Boston was occupied by 2,000 British troops. So obviously the colonists didn't like that. These troops were very underpaid by the government. So they would go around to different businesses asking for jobs. And they went to the nearby rope walk that was near the State House asking for jobs, but that sort of upset the rope makers. And so they used to get in these fights, and these fights escalated and escalated. And finally, British soldiers shot into the crowd, killing 5 people, including Samuel Gray, a rope maker. This became known as the Boston Massacre. So you can see how the hemp industry was tied into that. In 1794, these rope walks burned down. And unfortunately, when you have a long wooden building, it's got a lot of hemp fiber and a lot of tar, one spark, boom, the rope walks are gone, and a lot of the surrounding town. Unfortunately, rope walks burned way too much back then. But in 1794, these rope walks burned, and the townspeople of Boston voted to build new rope walks in a less densely populated part of town, which happened to be right next to the Boston Common, if you can believe that. So we have the Boston Common here, Charles Street, and everything on the other side of Charles Street at that time was the Charles River and tidal basin. So there wasn't any back bay, there wasn't any Prudential Center or anything. It was all just water and swamp. So they put these rope walks here, and one of the conditions placed upon the owners of these rope walks was to build a seawall or a dam. And that began the encroachment on the back bay. So that was actually the beginning of creating the back bay. 30 years later, in 1824, this area was no longer remote, so the town of Boston bought this property back for $55,000, which back then was a lot of money. And Mayor Quincy had this land annexed to the Boston Common, creating one of Boston's most endearing landmarks, the Public Garden. So Boston's historic Back Bay and beautiful Public Garden owe their creation in no small part to the rope walks that once bordered Charles Street. Consider this the next time you're riding the swan boats or strolling down the tree-lined Commonwealth Avenue Mall. Rope walks inspired Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the most popular American poet of the 19th century, to write a moving poem titled The Rope Walk. And I'm going to read a couple verses. In that building, long and low, with its windows all a row, like the portholes of a hulk, human spiders spin and spin, backward down their threads so thin, dropping each a hempen bulk. At the end, an open door, squares of sunshine on the floor, light the long and dusky lane, and the whirring of a wheel dull and drowsy makes me feel. All its spokes are in my brain. So it's a little trippy poem, but it's very cool. And it goes on to talk about several of the uses of hemp rope, including rigging for sailing ships and the hangman's noose. So Boston continued to grow. They didn't have land for the rope walks, so the rope walks kept moving further and further away from the town. As a result, the Plymouth Cordage Company was founded in 1824. Hemp fiber was imported from Russia to Boston, then it was shipped to Plymouth, where it was spun into rope, then it was shipped back to Boston for sale and distribution. The Plymouth Cordage Company operated for 140 years, and at one time was the largest cordage manufacturer in the world. This rope walk is in Mystic, Connecticut now, so they moved an entire rope walk from Plymouth down to Mystic Seaport Museum in Connecticut, where you can go and actually see how they hackled the hemp fiber and spun it into cordage. So it's a very nice exhibit. It's a beautiful museum there, but it's really cool that they have a whole rope walk there. And the fact that they moved this rope walk all the way from Plymouth to Mystic highlights the importance of rope making to the shipbuilding industry. The 45-acre site of the Plymouth Cordage Company has been turned into the Cordage Commerce Center. It's home to over 60 businesses and organizations, including Plymouth Rock Movie Studio. It's also the last stop on the MBTA's Old Colony commuter rail line, so you can take the T down to Cordage Park, visit their Cordage Museum where you can learn more about the history of rope making and view some of the artifacts of the Plymouth Cordage Company. In the 1830s, the United States Navy decided they needed to start making their own rope, because there were rope walks everywhere, but the Navy wanted to make their own rope. So they built this magnificent rope making complex in the Charlestown Navy Yard. This had it has granite walls and slate roof, and it was built to last, which it has. It opened in 1837 and operated until 1971. And it was designed by Alexander Paris, who also designed Quincy Market near Faneuil Hall, which is very close to that. So the Charlestown Rope Walk, it's still there. You can see it's sort of derelict, unfortunately. But this rope walk had steam-powered rope-making machinery, and Russian hemp and Manila hemp from the Philippines were the primary raw materials. In 1840, in another effort to create a domestic hemp industry, a contract was signed for 70,000 pounds of hemp fiber from Kentucky. Unfortunately, the fiber was rejected by the Navy because of its inferior quality, and that decimated the Kentucky hemp industry. So we tried to grow hemp in America, but the way we processed the fiber, it wasn't good enough for the Navy, so they continued to use Russian hemp and Philippine hemp. Now this whole rope making complex, part of the complex includes a hemp house where they stored all the hemp before they turned it into rope, as well as a tar house where they heated the tar. And then behind the tar house you can see the rope walk. The hemp house was renovated, as a lot of the buildings in the Charlestown Navy Yard had been renovated into a very nice office space. But the tar house and the rope walk are still derelict and they need to be renovated. One weekend I went up on the Tobin Bridge and shot down a picture of the rope walk, and you've got downtown Boston in the background, and you can see the USS Constitution there, the masts of the Constitution. So you can see this quarter-mile length rope walk. It's a beautiful building and the masts of the Constitution. And you can go, they also have a museum, a free museum there with rope making exhibits and a lot of pictures about how they used to make rope back there. So this historic landmark is a vivid reminder of the key role that cannabis hemp played in this country's history. And while preliminary restoration studies have been performed, much more work is needed to fully restore this monument to its rightful place in the history of America's industry, defense, and prosperity. So,